Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. I would like to welcome you all for Unit 2 in the module of Islam and Modern Politics. Today, in fact, in this unit, we have a discussion related to Bernard Lewis' view over Islam and modernity. In this unit, we have a specific focus as for Bernard Lewis, who wrote something quite significant about Islam and modernity, Islam and political thought, Islam and Muslim woman position in the Islamic political thought and the Islamic State. We would find that Lewis is focusing, in fact, on the Islam as a civilization, Islam as a civil society, and Islam and its interaction with the modernity and modernization. In many different aspects of his view over the modernity and modern issues and concepts, he raises, in fact, different points related to the relation between the West and East, and some issues related to the West and the Muslim or the Muslims in the Middle East in specific, and the Muslims across the world. And he tried, of course, from an Orientalist point of view, to judge many different things related to the Muslims' backwardness and how the Muslims missed the point of catching up with the modernity and catching up with the development happening in the world and in the situation surrounding them. What we can notice in his discussion, that he concentrated and focused a lot on the woman as one of the main issues related to Islam and modernity, and he focused as well on the secularism and how the Muslims missed the point when it comes to the separation between the religion and the state, or the religion and politics. In other words, we could find that Lewis, in fact, is taking most of his discussion towards blaming the Arabs and the Muslims of their backwardness with regard to the way how to deal with the woman issue and the woman position, and how to accept the other or the others' views. And here the others, it means the Westerners and the Western civilization, the Western development, regardless of talking about colonialism, imperialism, regardless of the negative impacts left in the Middle East and on the Muslim communities and the nature of the development related to those issues. Addressing many difficult questions, in fact, in his discussion, would lead us to raise many different questions. Those questions would be related to whether he was giving a neutral observation over the like the description of the backwardness, or he was just giving an Orientalist view, like other Orientalists who just dealt with Muslims as backward people because they committed themselves to Islam as a religion, and they didn't think to separate or to seek any separation between Islam and politics, or Islam and the state. And here I would be wondering, in fact, whether Louis, representing the whole Westerners' thought, or the whole Westerners' views over Islam and its relation with the modernity, or it's just his own view, and whether this view is somehow logical, or it's just related to political agenda, related to maybe religious agenda. We have to discuss this and to take it into consideration when we discuss different aspects, especially if we have the factors discussing the Ottomans and their reaction towards the modernity and the development in politics, development in economics, development in different aspects related to the state, to the state structure, democracy, feminism, how to treat the woman in the community, how to judge her position, how to improve her situation. All these issues and points would be much appreciated if we can take the discussion like to another phase or another steps, and I am happy to lead the discussion with my students, and happy, of course, to answer any questions or to hear some generic points and views over this topic.
Thank you very much for your interesting discussion. I do have a few questions for you. As you said, Bernard Louis and other Orientalists' views regarding the backwardness of the Muslims and the Arabs. Now, if you look at the contemporary Arab world, you might see the views of the Orientalist or Louis's views taking place in the Arab world. For example, in many countries, especially in the Middle East, you will see that not a lot of women are in power, not a lot of women have political statuses, high political statuses. Even in some countries, they don't go to school, they're not allowed to go to school, they get shot for going to school. In many countries, such as the Gulf, they rely on Western developments and Western engineers and doctors, etc. So would you agree with Bernard Louise's view that practically in the Islamic world they are backwards?
Well, here we have to differentiate between two factors or two elements, and those factors would be in fact related to whether he is intending to accuse Islam or intending to accuse Muslims. Implicitly, he's accusing both, although in different statements of himself, talking about Islam as different issue, where he's not accusing Islam, but he's accusing Muslims and their understanding of Islam, and even he is encouraging Muslims to go back to the original Islam and trying to revive the concepts and the understanding of the original Islam where they can serve their community. But in the other hand, we would find him talking about the secularism and talking about how Muslims could be improved just if they adopted the secularism and they adopted the modernity from the Western point of view. And this is like kind of discrepancy or contradiction, because there is no separation between Muslims and Islam, first of all. Although I would agree with him that the understanding would be completely different. So if he is saying that the Muslims have to go back to re-understand or revive the understanding of Quran and Islam, and this will contribute towards the modernity and modernizing their communities, but in the same time he is saying that he wouldn't imagine that the Muslim world or the Muslims in general would improve and develop unless they accepted the secularism. So there is this you can't ask them to go to revive Islam, the original Islam, and at the same time saying, well, you have to adopt the secularism, where in fact there is like a huge difference between both of them. This is one point. The other point, whether the backwardness is related to the woman and her position in the Muslim communities. And here we have to judge, in fact, or to ask ourselves, did Islam give the woman better position that compared to what she is given in the Muslim communities? The answer would be yes, even improved her position within the community. And before Islam, in fact, the woman was almost nothing in the community. Islam came and imposed a lot of rules to improve and develop her position in the family, in the community, in many different aspects of the community life. So being very careful and in the same time curious about his reasons of accusing Islam of diminishing the position or marginalizing the position of women in Islam, because in one of his statements he's saying that woman even was treated in much worse way than the slaves in the community. She would be facing a lot of difficulties within the community when it comes to the comparison between her status and the slaves status in the community, which is not true. All the state, I mean, even in the worst situation within the Muslim communities who are adopting their views based on their culture rather Islam, still the woman got some positions. But if we judge the situation as Louis in fact encouraged the Muslim to do, going to original Islam and the Islamic origins, we would find the woman in Islam gained a very important position, and even she was in fact given a lot of encouragement to be involved in the family issue, to be financially independent, to be educated, to have even some positions, and this is would be something we have to consider when we read Louis and his view in his book, what went wrong in the Islamic civilization.
Thank you very much for your answer. I wanted to point out a few things to you. That if one is to compare and contrast countries that have a majority Muslim populations, if you were to compare and contrast the secular states with those who consider themselves an Islamic state, for example, Turkey and Saudi Arabia. Whereas Turkey, they have a majority Muslim population, they are ruled by secular rule. And if you were to go to Turkey now, you would find that perhaps the women, they have a lot of rights. They can, even the basic rights, for example, driving cars, being able to vote, being able to become MPs, to work, education.
They have active role in the community.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Whereas, for example, in Saudi Arabia, I've heard that women are not allowed to drive cars. Now, for example, Bernard Louis, when he sees, for example, that a state which says about itself that it is an Islamic state and it doesn't give the women their rights, can we blame him for making such suggestions or assumptions?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's at the end of the day, the one who can be blamed is always the Muslims and the Muslim communities, because their practice and their so-called Islamic way of life, which we have a lot of argument over this, whether many Muslim communities committed to the Islamic way of life, this different question, and we have to have different discussion and different debate to be able to answer this. But mentioning Saudi Arabia and mentioning Turkey as let's say two extreme opposite each other, will take us back to the question of the cultural interpretation of the religion, yes, and the elements, the factors contributed to that culture. You can't really separate the way of life, the traditions, the habits, which they are all well established and deeply rooted in the community, from the interpretation of the religion, and in this case Islam. And this would be the same about Turkey. You can't really understand Islam and how they look for the woman by separating the culture. And the tribal culture in Saudi Arabia gives them completely different interpretation of Islam and Quran, and as a result deciding about the position of women in the community. Going to Turkey, we can't separate our understanding of the woman's position in the community without going and studying in depth the experience of Kemal Ataturk, where he brought this extreme secularism to the system, which becomes deeply rooted afterwards in the community and in the culture of the community, where what Saudis can accept and imagine to accept regarding the woman wouldn't be accepted at all under the Turkish culture or within the Turkish culture. Pakistan would be the same case. And even in the Middle East, when you look at the Arab experiences, the Muslim Arabs' experiences towards the woman would be completely different. Now going to Asia and talking about Malaysia, they have completely different cultural interpretation and understanding of Islam and Quran, where the woman would occupy better position, where the woman now is very well established in the high ranking positions in the universities, in the government. They are in fact contributing towards the whole economic cycle in Malaysia. Indonesia would be a different case, and so on. So every single country would be subject to a thorough investigation regarding their own cultures, and based on that we can understand, even between Bangladesh and Pakistan, although they are close to each other, but in the same time you would find the woman position in Bangladesh is different from the woman position in Pakistan, and the same about the Muslim woman in India, and so on. So we have to consider all these factors together before just give a generic judgment, or before we try to generate any new ruling over this issue. So I wouldn't agree with Louis at all in his narrow understanding of the woman position in Islam. He has to say the woman position in the Muslim community to be able to give the clear and the true picture of the woman position in Islam, or how the woman is positioned in Islam and the Muslim communities.
So do you think Louis' understanding is not very deep about Islam, and he is considering culture as Islam?
Yes, I would, as I just mentioned earlier, I would consider his study, his view over Islam, over the Islamic civilization, as based on the culture, really, not Islam. I doubt that he did read or study Islam deeply and in proper way. I mean, there is some academic points he raised, but all related in fact to his understanding or to his view over the Muslim community cultures, which we all know that there is some or there are some factors to be shared between the Muslim communities, but every single community has different view over different issues, over the finance, over the man position, and he didn't consider as well that within Muslim communities or recent Islam that you have the Shia culture and the Sunni culture. Within the Shia culture, different cultures as well will be divided into different cultures. The same would be considered as for the Sunni. So all of these, and Muslims and non-Muslims, by the way, because he mentioned many times about the infidel and how the Muslims attitude was formed towards the infidel which they are called kuffar, which they are not accepted at all under in some Muslims views. But in general, we would find that, for example, the infidel or the kuffar under Islam, as Islam, they are given rights, they have duties in the Muslim communities as far as they agreed and accepted to live under the Islamic state rules.
So we could assume that, like, each and every society, obviously in West as well, there is merits and demerits. So these are the merits and demerits of the society, not the merits and demerits of the Islam.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
Do you think it is appropriate to suggest that in an ideal Islamic state, women would have all of her rights? Yes. However, in a secular state, a woman would have more rights than in a state that promotes itself as an Islamic state, but it is not actually an Islamic state. Because from my point of view, the comparison is that a secular state, the women living in a secular state has more rights than a woman living in a so-called Islamic state at the moment in present day. Would you agree to this suggestion?
Yes, as for current situation, I do even agree with Louis that the Muslim world is living, in fact, just to consume what is produced in the West. And but I wouldn't agree with him that the modernity or modernizing the Muslim community or the Muslim country just by only relying on the Western pattern of modernization or modernity, because he forgot for so many years that Muslims, in fact, got a very advanced civilization, and this civilization gave a lot to the whole humanity in science, in arts, in music, in politics, in economy, in many different aspects. And he forgot many times, because he mentioned in one of his statements that the Muslims will never go to the European countries to learn their languages, you see, or any European language. But in the same time, the Europeans were very much interested to go to the Arab world to learn Arabic. He didn't realize, in fact, that at that time, the Muslims and the Arabic language was the language of science, as much as English nowadays. So the Europeans, they had to go there if they wanted to improve and to develop. But Muslims didn't have any interest, because there was no science, no like modernity in the way how Louis introducing it, to go to any of the European countries to benefit from learning the language or getting new skills from those countries. So I don't see sometimes a deep knowledge or a deep knowledge in his statements, because we have to consider the history, we have to consider the historic improvement as well, and development within the communities and the movement of the communities.
I wanted to ask you, as you know, in Western societies, they have a lot of laws and rules and regulations that is very close to Islamic laws in its own unique way. Whereas in the Islamic world and in the Arab world in particular, we have so many different sects, we have so many different interpretations of the religion and the Quran. In my view, it will be difficult for them to have a mutual agreement over one law and the right way of following Islam. So would secularism be the middle ground? Would a state being secular be a mutual agreement between all the Arab and Muslim states to adopt, as they can't get into an agreement over the correct Islamic laws and regulations?
Well, there are like some aspects I would agree with, but I wouldn't agree with some other aspects as well. Because if we look at Quran as the constitution of Muslim state, and the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad as the way or the best way how to implement it, we have to look into something in between, and this would be in fact the regulations, exactly like when we talk about the American Constitution, talking about the British Constitution, the French Constitution, whatever, where almost are not touchable. No one can really touch them. But the laws, the regulations, the rules are organized by the people. And this is how the way of the early understanding of Islam and Quran. Because the people were organizing their own daily life issues based on man-made law. But all the inspirations and the principles were coming in fact from the constitution, and this constitution is the divine constitution. So we wouldn't be arguing here about whether the Muslims would be able to create their own laws, of course, because they have to do this to organize their daily life. Every single issue would occur with regard to the finance, with regard to the traffic rules, with regard to the planning, with regard to many different things, but not to be against the constitution. And this is easy to understand, in fact, because all the Western countries wouldn't be able to decide anything related to the law and regulations without referring directly to their own constitutions.
But what do you think about the United Kingdom? They do not have any written constitution here. And since their constitution is based on the traditions, so they have
customs,
so much
called customary constitution,
so much flexibility they do have. So what do you think here? Like, how do you like?
Well, I don't agree that unwritten constitution is a flexible constitution. I see it, in fact, something is very hard to change. You see, because when you talk about constitutional rule, so you are talking, in fact, about something was very well established, deeply rooted in the community custom, in the community traditions, community habits, and so on. So you have something even like initiated and mixed with the people's culture or the nation's culture, you know. So it's something you can't change with the time even. And this is one of the evidences that usually they are going back and referring to something was stated in the constitution or established in the customary constitution for the last 300-400 years. And this wouldn't be a strange case when we make the analogy between just the man-made constitution and the divine constitution. Divine constitution is a way of life, and the man-made constitution is a way of life. It is the same, or the principles of how you design your way of life. And this what the early Muslims in fact did at the beginning. You find them, they have very advanced civil planning for the cities, for rural areas, for the system of irrigation, for many different things, architecture and this and that. So, and they did have the advanced system of education as well. This wasn't written in their constitution, which is the Quran in this case, but it was in fact inspired by this constitution and didn't work against the principles of this constitution.
Do you regard the lack of stability in the Middle East as due to the culture of the people there?
No, we can't ignore very important factor, which is the colonialism. Colonialism, in fact, contributed hugely to destabilize those communities. And you can't just turn your eyes blind from the facts that many countries are still suffering the impacts or the negative impacts of the colonialism, because they've been occupied or colonialized for so many years with no freedom, no economy, no proper education, no proper health care, and in addition to that, their natural resources and the human resources were fully exploited by the colonialism, where the raw materials were in fact stolen and given just to the colonialists, and contributed to their improvement, to their industrial revolution, and so on. So being aware and living in the Western countries, we can't seriously ignore the impacts which the Muslim communities and the other Muslim and non-Muslim, I mean any country lived under the occupation or was colonized by Britain, by France, by different countries, different European and Western countries, that they contributed a lot towards the destabilization of their communities and their countries. Many of them still suffering from this.
So what can these countries do about it? I mean, before the Industrial Revolution and the colonies, in the region there was French occupation, Ottoman occupation. Before that there was the Roman occupation. So perhaps these occupation and these colonies are going to continue. So what can the Muslims do about it? About their education and their infrastructure, to improve that and to improve rights for the women, rights for the ethnic minorities, for example?
Well, they have to go back to the main resource and to have the inspirations from the principles of their constitution, simply. Because when we discuss any issue with any individual in let's say where we live in the UK, we can simply say that there is a constitutional rule, yes, and everyone should be equal or equally treated based on this constitutional principle or rule. So everyone would be happy about this. And it is the same. The Muslims missed the point that they couldn't separate or isolate the traditions, the culture from the main principles of the religion, where many things in fact were mixed. I mean, a lot of accusations against Taliban and their affiliation to Islam, and the result of that, or the impact of that on the woman position in Afghanistan, where the people don't understand that what is practiced and exercised against the woman in Afghanistan is related to the Pashtun culture, not to the Islamic rules. Yeah, so many people just they make the affiliation automatically or the automatic relation between Islam and Islamic rules and the practices on the ground. So we have to be careful when we consider this. We have to be careful as well when we discuss let's say the Westerners' view, even the individual Westerners. Many people who were brought up with misleading information about the backwardness. Backwardness, of course, you have to work very hard to get out of the backwardness. You shouldn't consider yourself as a consumer and that's it. You have to, just to start up at some point. How this is quite complicated. You have a lot of conflicts really to answer this question, because there is no definite a question. You might find a lot of people with thousands of views over this, but when it comes to Muslim community, Muslim state, and Muslim development, so you have to think that if the people are inspired by a uniform constitutional principles, probably they would be able to tackle their problems and to solve it in much better way.
I don't have any further questions. Thank you very much for all the information, and I look forward to the next lesson.
Okay, thank you very much, and I hope we did touch different ideas related to this unit, and hopefully next week we will have another class with further discussion, and hopefully this would benefit our students and encourage them to investigate and to carry out more activities and answering the questions in academic way. Thank you very much. Thank you.